He beat me because I refused to sign off my fortune. The bruises faded, but what I did next, that scarred him for life. Stick with me while I share my story. And if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is June Kalter, and that night, I sat on my kitchen floor with blood on my hands, my own blood. My cheek was swollen, my vision blurry. The sound of the front door slamming still echoed in my head. Dean, my husband, had just stormed out after trying to make me sign over my inheritance. Everything my father had left me before he passed. That money wasn't just money. It was my father's last memory, his lifetime of hard work. And Dean wanted it all. He said it was for our future. But I knew better. He wanted control. The papers he threw at me still lay scattered across the floor, some torn, some covered in blood. What he didn't know was that I'd already signed a different set of documents earlier that day, fake ones. I'd forged them to look real, knowing he'd eventually try something like I had a plan, and he had just walked right into it. I remember how he looked at me before he hit me, the anger, the greed. His voice had gone cold, no love in it anymore. "You're nothing without me," he'd said, gripping my wrist hard enough to leave bruises. "Sign it, June. Don't make me ask again." But I didn't. I looked him in the eyes and said, "I'd rather starve than give you a dime." That's when he snapped. His hand came down across my face before I even saw it coming. The world spun, and the next thing I knew, I was on the floor, my breath gone, tasting iron. When he finally left, I sat there for a long time, shaking. I didn't cry. I couldn't. Something in me had gone still, like a flame that had burned too hot and turned into cold steel. I wiped the blood from my lips, pushed myself up, and went to the drawer where I kept my secret phone. I made one call, to my lawyer, Elaine. My voice was steady when I told her, "It's done." He took the bait. Outside, I could hear his truck start. I looked out the window and watched his taillights fade into the dark. He thought he'd broken me, thought he'd scared me into giving up. But all he'd done was give me the reason to finish what I started. I touched the fake papers on the counter, the ones that would lead him straight into a legal nightmare. Then I locked the door, packed a small bag, and left the house through the back door. He thought I'd run away. He had no idea I was coming back, for everything. It was raining the night I met Dean. My car had stalled at the edge of Route 19, wipers barely keeping up with the storm. I remember sitting there, gripping the wheel, half crying, half laughing at my bad luck, when headlights appeared behind me. A man stepped out, jacket soaked through, hair plastered to his forehead, smiling like the weather didn't bother him. "You okay there, ma'am?" he asked, his voice steady calm. That was Dean Kalter. Back then, I thought he was a blessing. He fixed the engine in the rain, refused to take money, and insisted on following me home to make sure I got there safely. By the time I parked in my driveway, I was already smiling at his stories and that easy, confident laugh of his. He showed up the next day with coffee, said he just wanted to check if the car was running fine. Then he started showing up more often. Dinners turned into weekends together, weekends turned into plans, and before I knew it, I couldn't imagine my life without him. When my father passed away, Dean was there. He held me when I cried, took care of everything I couldn't handle. He stayed up late making sure I ate, kept the house running, and told me I wasn't alone. I clung to that warmth. I believed it. The day the will was read, everything changed. My father had left me his company shares, the lake house, and a trust fund, everything in my name. Dean squeezed my hand and smiled, but something in his eyes shifted. It wasn't love anymore. It was calculation. That night he said, "We can finally build the life we dreamed of." His voice sounded soft, but the words sat wrong with me. We. He said it again and again. Our money, our future, our choices. But none of it was his. Little things started to stand out after that. He'd ask about my father's lawyer, pretending to make conversation. "What's her name again? Elaine something." Or he'd tease. "You still remember all those passwords your dad set up? You should write them down before you forget." At first, I thought it was harmless. But one evening, I came home to find him sitting at my desk, my laptop open. He smiled quickly, said he was just checking his email. I wanted to believe him, so I did. He started bringing up investments, joint accounts, shared property, insurance policies. He said he was thinking long-term, for us. He made it sound romantic, thoughtful. But every conversation circled back to what I owned, what my father left me, what could be ours if I trusted him. Then came the small lies, the missing mail, the way he'd take phone calls outside. I'd ask questions and he'd laugh it off, saying I worried too much. I wanted to believe the man who fixed my car in the rain still existed. But deep down, I knew that night was the only time he ever saved me. Every moment after that, he was just waiting to take everything I had. The first crack showed up the night I came home late from dinner with Callie. Dean was waiting in the living room, lights off, phone in his hand. His voice was low, careful. "You didn't answer my texts," he said. I told him I hadn't seen them, that I was driving, but he didn't believe me. He wanted to see my phone. I laughed, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. That was the start. He began checking everything, my calls, my emails, my messages. At first, he framed it as concern. "I just worry about you," he'd say, or, "You know how people get when they hear you've got money." But the worry didn't feel like care. It felt like control. He started choosing who I could see. When Callie called, he'd say I needed rest. When Elaine invited us to her office, he'd say he was too busy and that I shouldn't bother her with unnecessary legal talk. He told me friends only stirred trouble, that people wanted to use me. I didn't see it then, but he was cutting away every piece of my world until all that was left was him. Elaine noticed before I did. She called one afternoon, her tone sharp. "June," she said, "someone's been asking about your father's estate, your accounts, your trust." The inquiries traced back to Dean's company. My hand went cold. I told her I'd handle it. She warned me to be careful. I promised I would. That night, I set my phone on the counter and smiled when he asked who I'd been talking to. "Just my lawyer," I said lightly, pretending it was nothing. He smiled back, but I saw the flicker in his eyes, the same one from the day the will was read. From then on, I played the part. I laughed when he made jokes about being my financial manager. I nodded when he told me I should trust him with everything. But behind that act, I started planning. He had a temper. It came fast, disappeared faster. He'd yell, slam doors, then come back with flowers and apologies. "You know I don't mean it," he'd whisper, kissing the same cheek he'd shouted at hours earlier. "You make me crazy because I love you so much." I stopped arguing. I just started recording. At first, it felt wrong, hiding a phone under the couch cushion, setting it to record while pretending to fold laundry. But after every apology, he found a new reason to explode. He called it love. I called it survival. I began moving money quietly, tiny amounts, nothing noticeable. Transfers that looked like groceries, car maintenance, household bills. Every week, a little more vanished into a private account only Elaine knew about. In public, I was still the devoted wife, smiling beside him at dinners, pretending everything was fine. But each secret deposit, each hidden bruise, was a step closer to freedom. Dean thought he was watching me. He never realized I'd already started watching him. The night started quiet. The kind of silence that feels heavy, waiting for something to break. I was in the kitchen, rinsing a glass when I heard his footsteps behind me, slow, steady, too calm. Dean stood in the doorway, a paper crushed in his hand. His face was pale, eyes sharp with that strange, controlled anger that always came before the storm. He tossed the paper on the counter. "You think I wouldn't find this?" he said. It was the document I'd made, the fake transfer of assets. I'd forged it to see if he'd take the bait, and he had. He stepped closer, his voice low. "You lied to me." I kept my hand still. "It was just a test," I said quietly. "I wanted to see if I could trust you." He laughed, a short, cold sound. "Trust me? You forged my signature and called it trust." His laugh vanished as fast as it came. "You're going to sign the real papers now." He pulled another document from his jacket. This one wasn't fake. My name was already printed on the line where he wanted my signature. "Sign it, June," he said. I shook my head. "No." The air shifted. I saw it in his shoulders, the way his hand clenched. He came closer, so close I could smell the whiskey on his breath. "You've made me do this," he said, voice shaking. "I'm trying to save us." His hand hit me before I could move. The sound cracked through the kitchen. The glass I'd been holding slipped and shattered across the tile. He kept shouting about betrayal, about how I owed him, about how I'd ruined everything. The words blurred into noise as he shoved me against the counter. My ribs screamed, and I couldn't breathe. When he stopped, I was on the floor. My mouth tasted of blood and dust. He stood over me, chest heaving, waiting for me to say something. I didn't. I just looked up at him. He spat the words out like they burned his tongue. "You're nothing without me." Then he grabbed the fake papers, tore them, and stormed out. The door slammed, and the house went quiet again. I lay there for a moment, trying to catch my breath. My body hurt everywhere, but my mind was clear. I turned my head toward the counter, saw the real transfer papers still lying there. His mistake. I pushed myself up slowly, using the wall for balance. Blood dripped onto the tile, one drop at a time. I wiped it away with the back of my hand, steadying my breath. My reflection in the kitchen window looked like a stranger, swollen, broken, but alive. I picked up my keys, grabbed my coat, and left through the back door. The night air stung my skin, but I didn't stop. I drove straight to Callie's house. When she opened the door, her face went pale. She didn't ask questions, just pulled me inside. An hour later, the police took my statement. My voice didn't shake once. When it was over, I looked at the officer and said, "He's going to regret this." By morning, I was gone. Days turned into weeks, and my absence became his story to tell. Dean told anyone who'd listen that I'd lost my mind, that that I'd run away after a breakdown. He played the grieving husband perfectly, eyes red, voice trembling, shaking his head in pity. She wasn't herself, he'd say. The stress after her father's death, it got to her. People believed him. They always did. He didn't know I was watching from far away. My name wasn't June Kelter anymore. The papers had already been signed, stamped, and sealed under a new identity before he ever touched me that night. Everything, bank accounts, property deeds, even the trust, had been transferred quietly to a name he didn't know existed. Back in that house, Dean started to dig. He went through my drawers, my files, my emails, searching for something to prove he still had control. When he found nothing, he took it further. He forged my signature on sale agreements, property transfers, even legal documents. Each time, he waited, expecting confirmation. Each time, the documents came back rejected. He started making calls, angry, desperate ones. He accused my lawyer of interference, accused the bank of fraud. But behind his shouting, there was a thread of fear. He didn't understand why every door kept closing in his face. One night, he sat in that same kitchen, surrounded by piles of paperwork, empty bottles beside him. That's when the first envelope arrived. No return address. Inside, one photograph. It showed him standing over me, his hand mid-swing caught in motion. He stared at it for hours before ripping it apart. 2 days later came another one, this time a USB drive. When he plugged it in, his own voice filled the room. "You're nothing without me." The same words he'd shouted before he left me bleeding on the floor. He smashed the laptop against the wall. The sound echoed in the empty house. After that, he started sleeping with the lights on. He told his friend Luke someone was following him. He said he felt watched. Luke laughed it off, but the tremor in Dean's voice said otherwise. Another envelope came the next week. Inside, copies of forged documents, each marked with red ink, invalid signature. Below that, a note written in block letters. "You can't steal what was never yours." He stopped eating. He stopped answering calls. The confidence that once filled his every word was gone. He started showing up at the police station, asking if they'd found me, pretending he wanted me safe. The officers nodded politely, unaware of the truth. I stayed silent. Every night, another reminder arrived at his door. Another piece of himself reflected back in paper, ink, and sound. He'd built his life on control, and now every bit of it was slipping through his fingers. From the distance where I watched, I didn't feel guilt or satisfaction, only calm. He thought I'd disappeared out of shame, but I hadn't vanished. I'd just stepped out of his shadow and left him to drown in it. The town looked smaller when I came back. Same streets, same stores, same faces, but I was no longer June Kelter. My name was Clara Ward now, and no one looked twice when I passed. The air smelled of wet pavement and gasoline, and for the first time in months, I felt invisible in the best way. Elaine was the only one who knew every detail of what I'd built since leaving. She had handled the transfers, the new identity, the trail that led nowhere. When I stepped into her office again, she didn't ask if I was sure. She just said, "It's time." I nodded. She handed me a small envelope. Inside were the copies, records of the forged signatures, evidence of money Dean had taken from his own company and tried to hide under shell accounts. Every number, every transaction had his fingerprints all over it. Through Callie, we began letting pieces slip into the right places. Anonymous tips, quiet deliveries, a photograph here, a document there. Nothing too direct, just enough to stir attention. By the end of the week, the whispers had started. Dean's company, Kelter Construction, was suddenly under review. Auditors walked through his office unannounced, folders in hand, asking questions that made him sweat. When they left, he'd call Luke, his business partner, shouting about betrayal and loyalty. But Luke wasn't answering as often. Luke had always believed Dean was the genius behind their success. Then Elaine sent him one particular file, proof that my father's money, not Dean's effort, had funded their first project. Luke's faith cracked the moment he read it. When Dean finally reached him, Luke's tone was different. "You lied to me," he said flatly. "You said she didn't contribute a cent." Dean tried to talk over him, but Luke cut the call. That silence was the sound of his empire starting to fold. He began drinking earlier each day, pacing through his office with a gunmetal flask in one hand and that first photo of me in the other. To him, I wasn't gone. I was everywhere. Every phone call that dropped, every flicker of light outside his window became proof I was watching. He changed his locks twice, installed cameras around the house, fired 2 employees for snooping. But the evidence kept coming. Bank statements appeared in his briefcase that he swore he hadn't packed. Copies of the police report from that night slid under his door. Callie and I watched from a distance, careful and quiet. Every move he made was expected, every reaction predicted. He was unraveling on schedule. One night, he drove past the lake house my father had left me, my house now, parking at the edge of the property. He sat there for an hour, headlights off, staring into the dark. I knew what he was thinking. He believed I was still in that house, haunting him. He wasn't wrong. I was haunting him, just not with ghosts. With truth. The ballroom shimmered with gold light, the sound of glasses clinking and polite laughter floating through the air. It was the annual Ridgeway Foundation Gala, the kind of event where everyone wore masks of wealth and grace. Dean arrived late, already unsteady, his tie hanging loose around his neck. His eyes were red, the kind that hadn't seen a full night's sleep in weeks. I stood near the back of the room, under my new name, Clara Ward, a quiet investor from out of state. No one looked twice. The champagne in my hand trembled slightly, not from nerves but from anticipation. Dean's entrance drew attention immediately. He greeted no one, ignored the photographers, and headed straight for the bar. He ordered whiskey after whiskey, his voice loud enough to turn heads. Luke Harlan was already there, talking with a group of investors. When Dean spotted him, something in his face twisted. "You think you can steal from me?" Dean's voice cut across the music. The room quieted. "You're all thieves. Every last one of you." Luke tried to calm him, but Dean shoved him away. Cameras started to rise, phones, flashes, whispers. The host approached, attempting to defuse the scene, but Dean wasn't done. "You're all part of it," he slurred, waving an unsteady hand. "Her lawyer, her friends, she planned this. You hear me? June did this to me." A few people laughed nervously, thinking it was some drunken ramble. Others looked uncomfortable, turning away. The man who once commanded every room was now the spectacle. He stumbled toward the stage, nearly knocking over a server. Security moved, but not fast enough. Dean grabbed the microphone, his voice echoing through the hall. "She's not dead," he shouted. "You all think she's gone, but she's still here. She's everywhere, watching me, waiting." The microphone was cut off. 2 guards escorted him out as he cursed, still shouting my name. Guests murmured, the music restarted awkwardly, and the night went on like a wound pretending to heal. From my corner, I didn't move. I just watched. The woman beside me whispered, "Poor man. Seems he's lost it." I smiled faintly. By morning, every local news outlet carried the story. Videos of his breakdown flooded the town. Reporters camped outside his office. The words Calter Construction became a punchline. Clients pulled out of contracts. Board members resigned. Dean tried to issue a statement, blaming exhaustion, stress, false accusations. But the footage spoke for itself. The wild eyes, the rage, the name he screamed over and over. My name. He became a ghost in daylight, trapped in the glare of public pity. Luke cut ties officially, announcing a new branch under his own leadership. The press called it an overdue separation. Elaine called me that evening. "It's done," she said. "He's finished." I stood by the window of my hotel room, watching the skyline glow faintly pink in the distance. "Not yet," I said softly. "He still doesn't know who took his life apart. Not until I tell him myself." The humiliation was only the beginning. The letter reached him on a gray morning, hand-delivered by an officer. It wasn't from me, it was from the court. Inside were the official charges: assault, fraud, coercion, and forgery. Every piece of proof I'd gathered had been laid out, stamped, and signed under my lawyer's name. Elaine had moved quickly, and by noon that same day, every one of his accounts was frozen. His mansion, cars, and business holdings were all placed under investigation. He read the papers 3 times, sitting at the same kitchen table where his rage had once ruled the house. The walls seemed smaller now, the silence louder. His hands trembled as he reached for the phone, dialing number after number. Lawyers, bankers, anyone who'd still answer. Most didn't. The few who did gave him the same answer. "There's nothing we can do." By evening, he'd run out of options. That's when he tried calling me. He didn't know where I lived, but he still had my old number, the one I'd kept active for this moment. When it rang, I let it go twice before answering. "June," he said immediately, voice cracking. "Please. I just need to talk. I can fix this. I'll make it right." I said nothing. I could hear his breathing on the other end, ragged and desperate. "I know I hurt you," he went on. "I wasn't myself. I lost everything because of you. Just tell me what you want. Money. An apology. I'll give you anything." His voice shook on that last word, the sound of a man realizing the world had moved on without him. "You took everything from me once," I said finally, my voice steady, calm. "Now you know how it feels." There was silence. Then a whisper. "Please, June. Just one conversation. Face to face." I waited, then answered. "One last time. Tomorrow. You know where." The next afternoon, I drove back to that house, the one he thought was still his. The police had already sealed off parts of it for investigation, but the kitchen remained untouched. The sunlight fell through the same window where I'd once stood bleeding. I heard his footsteps before I saw him. Dean walked in wearing the same look he'd had the night of the gala, tired, hollow, lost. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes dark and sunken. "You came," he said softly, as if the word itself was fragile. I said I would. He took a step closer, his hands raised like surrender. I didn't want it to end like this. I was angry, but I never stopped caring. I looked at him, at the man who'd once convinced me love and control were the same thing. You cared about power, I said. Not me. His lips trembled. I'm sorry, June. Sorry doesn't erase bruises. Or fear. He lowered his head, the fight gone from his eyes. The faint sound of cars outside told me the officers were waiting. They'll be here soon, I said quietly. He looked around the kitchen one last time, the same place he'd used as a weapon. I just wanted to talk. You should have done that before you raised your hand. When the police came through the door, I didn't watch him leave. I only listened, to the click of cuffs, the rustle of his breath breaking as they let him out. The kitchen was silent again, but this time it belonged to me. He sat across from me, his wrists still marked from the cuffs they had briefly removed. The kitchen smelled faintly of dust and cold air, sunlight cutting across the floor in sharp lines. Dean's shoulders were hunched, his hands clasped tightly together like a man clinging to the last piece of himself. I didn't know it would come to this, he said quietly, staring at the table instead of me. His voice was raw, stripped of its old arrogance. I thought I could fix it. I thought if I could just talk to you. I cut him off softly. Talking isn't what you did that night. He looked up then, and his eyes found the bracelet around my wrist, the thin silver one with a single turquoise bead. His face tightened as he recognized. I had worn it the night everything changed. His gaze lingered there, as if it was proof that time hadn't erased what he'd done. I'm not that man anymore, he said. I made mistakes, terrible ones, but I've paid for them. I've lost everything. What more do you want from me? I didn't answer right away. The clock on the wall ticked softly, steady and calm. I wanted him to feel that silence, the weight of it pressing down. Finally, I said, it's not about what I want. It's about what you took. He shook his head, his words stumbling out. Please, June. I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe that. I was scared. You were pulling away, and I didn't know how to stop it. You stopped it, I said. You stopped it with your hands. His lips parted like he might argue, but no sound came out. The fight had drained out of him long before I stepped back into that house. Now all that was left was a hollow man surrounded by the ruins he built himself. He leaned forward, his voice breaking. Tell me what to do. Tell me how to make it right. I'll do anything. I met his eyes. You can't make it right. You can only face what you did. His expression twisted, desperation spilling through the cracks. I need you to forgive me. I stood still, the bracelet glinting under the afternoon light. Forgiveness isn't mine to give, I said. It belongs to the life you tried to destroy. The words hung between us, heavy and final. He looked down, and for the first time, there was nothing in his posture but surrender. Outside, car doors slammed. The sound of boots on gravel drew closer. Dean flinched, his eyes darting toward the window. He knew what was coming. I guess this is it, he whispered. It was always coming, I said softly. When the officers entered, he didn't resist. He stood up slowly, his hands trembling as they placed the cuffs back around his wrists. As they led him past me, he turned his head slightly, searching for something in my face. Mercy, anger, maybe even love. I gave him nothing. He was still watching when I turned away. The sound of the door closing behind him echoed through the empty house. I didn't look back. The ocean became my neighbor. Each morning I woke to the sound of waves brushing against the shore, soft and steady, like a heartbeat I could finally trust. The little cottage I rented sat at the edge of the dunes, pale blue paint peeling from the windowsills, salt clinging to every surface. It wasn't grand, but it was mine, and for the first time in years, the air inside felt safe. I went by Clara Ward now. In town, people knew me as the quiet woman who painted near the pier and bought the same coffee every morning. No one asked questions, and I gave no answers. The anonymity fit me like new skin. The days passed without rush. I filled them with small things, morning walks, slow meals, letters never sent. Sometimes I'd stand at the shoreline, watching gulls circle above the water, thinking about everything that had burned away behind me. The chaos, the fear, the constant waiting for the next crack of his voice. All of it had faded like smoke. One afternoon, the phone rang. Elaine's name appeared on the screen. I hadn't heard her voice in weeks. I answered quietly, still staring at the horizon. It's over, she said. He took a plea deal. No trial. He'll serve time. For a moment, I couldn't find words. The sound of the ocean filled the space between us. How long? I asked finally. 7 years, she replied. Maybe less with good behavior. I nodded even though she couldn't see it. That's enough. Elaine hesitated. You did it, June. You got your life back. After she hung up, I set the phone on the table and stood by the window. The sun had begun to sink, throwing long orange streaks across the water. My reflection shimmered faintly on the glass. Older, calmer, a woman I barely recognized. I walked outside barefoot, the sand cool beneath my feet. The wind tugged at my hair, carrying the scent of salt and seaweed. The waves rolled in, breaking gently around my ankles. For the first time in so long, there was nothing left to run from. I thought about the night in the kitchen, the papers, the blood, the silence that had followed. He believed that silence was surrender, that my quiet meant he'd won. He never understood that silence could be sharper than any scream. It was patience, it was power, it was the space where his own downfall grew. The tide crept higher, washing over my footprints as quickly as I made them. I looked out across the water, where the horizon melted into fading light, and whispered to the wind. He thought my silence meant defeat. It was the sound of his ending beginning. Then I kept walking, the ocean rising and falling beside me, steady as my breath, carrying the last traces of him out to sea. Do you think I made the right choice by walking away, or should I have given him another chance? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.